Nobody noticed her. Nobody cared. She was just a farmer traveling alone, unremarkable in every way. But when both engines died at 40,000 feet and the aircraft became a falling coffin, she stood up. Her voice cut through the chaos like a weapon. The pilots heard procedures they didn't know existed. The F-22 fighters heard her call sign over the radio and froze. One whispered, "Commander." In that moment, 234 people discovered their neighbor was someone who could save them, and she discovered she could never truly escape who she used to be. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The cattle need feeding at dawn. This thought moves through Sarah Chen's mind as she settles into seat 14C, a window seat on Flight 447 from Denver to Chicago. It's the kind of practical thought that has defined her life for the past 8 years. Small, grounding, deliberately ordinary. The thought of cattle, of irrigation timers, of soil pH levels. The thought of anything except what she used to be. She wears Carhartt work pants with a genuine stain pattern that tells a real story of ranch labor. Her jacket is weathered canvas. The collar frayed at exactly the edges you'd expect from someone who wears the same coat through 3 seasons without thinking much about it. Her boots, honest work boots, not fashion approximations, carry the smell of genuine livestock operation. The leather is creased from actual work, not artfully distressed in some catalog shoot. She carries a worn canvas messenger bag as her personal item, the kind of practical bag a farmer might use to carry equipment manuals, receipts, and whatever needs carrying. Flight attendant Maria, who's worked this route for 12 years and has developed an almost supernatural ability to categorize passengers within seconds, barely glances at Sarah as she passes with the drink cart. Rural agriculture worker traveling alone would probably prefer water. Nice enough face, but tired eyes. The kind of tired that comes from managing livestock in difficult weather, not from interesting life experiences. Maria files Sarah away in that vast mental category of unremarkable passengers who will neither require special attention nor create any memorable incidents. The man in 14D, a venture capitalist checking his stock portfolio on an iPad, doesn't even register Sarah's presence. She's the type of person his brain literally doesn't catalog as significant. She could speak to him throughout the flight, and he'd struggle to describe her afterward beyond vague generalities. To him, she's background. She's the ambient humanity that exists in coach seating, but carries no weight in the architecture of his actual world. There's a young couple in 14A and 14B, honeymooners heading to visit family, who hold hands and whisper to each other. Sarah watches them for a moment with the quiet observation of someone who has spent years studying human behavior in high-stress situations, then turns her attention to the window. This invisibility is exactly what Sarah's worked so carefully to achieve. 8 years of deliberate construction, 8 years of becoming unremarkable. It wasn't easy. When you spent your entire adult life being known for your expertise, for your authority, for your decision-making under pressure, stepping away from all of that requires more than simply moving to a rural location. It requires fundamentally retraining how you move through the world, how you interact with people, how you present yourself. She settles into her seat and closes her eyes. And nobody watching would see the slight tension in her shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way her hands rest on an armrest in a position that's not quite relaxed, but trained to appear that way. Nobody watching would notice that her eyes, when closed, move beneath the lids in a pattern suggesting active thought rather than rest. Nobody would understand that her seemingly simple appearance conceals 8 years of intentional erasure and the kind of discipline that only comes from military training combined with absolute commitment to a chosen path. Back in 2016, Commander Sarah Chun had been one of the most decorated officers in military aviation history. Not famous publicly, classified command positions don't generate celebrity, but known with absolute certainty among the elite pilots, strategists, and military leadership who understood the weight of tactical decisions. She commanded operations across 3 theaters, trained generations of fighter pilots, overseen procedures that shaped military aviation doctrine, and carried the weight of hundreds of decisions that determined which pilots came home and which didn't. The decisions had accumulated a pilot who crashed during a training procedure she approved, She'd known his family. Another pilot who made a choice during combat that aligned with doctrine she'd helped establish. He survived, but barely. The weight of command authority isn't about single decisions. It's about the accumulation of decisions that ripple outward through hundreds of lives, through families, through the community of military personnel who depend on your judgment being sound. By 2015, she'd realized that she couldn't retire while still active. She needed to step away completely, not transfer to administration, not take a desk job, complete removal from the structure that would keep calling on her expertise, that would keep burdening her with decisions that would affect other people's lives. The retirement papers had been signed quietly. No farewell tours, no press releases, no ceremonies acknowledging her service beyond what military protocol required. She'd simply stepped away from a life of command authority and into the rural Colorado landscape, buying 120 acres outside a town of 2,000 people, raising cattle and horses, fixing fences, learning to live with a kind of anonymity that felt like freedom after decades of constant demand. The military had understood. The military always understands when a leader has earned the right to step away completely. There was no exit interview where they tried to convince her to stay. There were no offers of consulting positions. The institution recognized that some people reach a point where they need to be released from the weight they've been carrying. Most people don't know you can actually retire like that, can step entirely out of the structure, and nobody comes looking for you. Nobody calls you back. Nobody expects you to return. The military respects earned rest. You pay your dues. You survive your decisions. You carry your weight. And if you've done it long enough and well enough, you're allowed to simply become someone else. Sarah had become someone else with absolute commitment. No social media, no reconnection with military colleagues, no visits to the base, no conversations about her past. She didn't even think about it most days. Cattle require present attention. Horses require feed and water and shelter. Land requires maintenance. This work was honest and real, and didn't require her to make decisions that would haunt her for years. A fence either needs repair or it doesn't. An animal is sick or it's healthy. The problems of ranching are tangible and immediate and don't ripple outward to the lives of people you're responsible for leading. The aircraft pushes back from the gate with the mechanical efficiency of operations that happen hundreds of times daily. Sarah had booked this trip because a veterinary clinic in Chicago was hosting a symposium on managing livestock disease in changing climates, and she wanted to attend in person rather than watching video recordings. Even her professional development was carefully chosen to reinforce her farmer identity. Nobody questioned a rural rancher traveling for agricultural education. It was the perfect cover because it wasn't cover at all. It was genuine interest in her actual work. Flight time, 3 hours and 40 minutes from Denver to Chicago. She'd be home by tomorrow evening. The cattle would be fine. The ranch manager she employed part-time had clear instructions. Everything was managed. Everything was under control. This was the rhythm of her life now. Small trips, simple purposes, careful management of the land and the animals, and the structures that defined her new existence. The aircraft climbs through 10,000 feet, and the captain announces they're expecting a smooth flight. Typical November weather. Standard procedures. Sarah opens her eyes and watches the clouds beneath them, the landscape becoming abstract as altitude increases. She thinks about the cattle, about the winter hay supplies she needs to arrange next week, about the fence sections that need repair before snow hits, about the young horse she's been training to accept saddle work. Practical, grounding thoughts. She does not think about the last emergency simulation she conducted. She does not think about the procedures she mastered for engine failure recovery at extreme altitude. She does not think about the classified tactics she learned in environments she's now prohibited from discussing. She does not think about F-22 pilots or command authority or any of the weight she very deliberately left behind 8 years ago. These thoughts have become like muscles she's not using, still there, still capable of functioning, but inactive through years of deliberate neglect. The aircraft climbs through 20,000 feet, still climbing, still normal. The ride is smooth. The passengers are settled into the comfortable numbness of commercial flight. The beverage car comes to the cabin, and Maria offers Sarah water with the same neutral courtesy she offers to all of coach seating. Sarah accepts it with a nod and doesn't engage in conversation. She doesn't make eye contact longer than necessary. She maintains the quiet distance of someone without particular interest in social connection. Through the window, the landscape below becomes increasingly abstract. The mountains near Denver transition to rolling plains. The cities become grids of light and infrastructure. At this altitude, individual lives become invisible. Individual decisions become irrelevant. The world below is just geography. Sarah has learned to find peace in this perspective that from 30,000 feet, even the most consequential human decisions appear insignificant. Outside the window, the sky transitions from blue to deep indigo to the color of space. The curve of the earth becomes apparent. Sarah has seen this view thousands of times, and she's carefully trained herself to see it as beautiful rather than as a geography of responsibility, a reminder of the complexity of the world she's responsible for managing. At 35,000 feet, Captain James Morrison, 15 years on commercial routes, clean record, family at home, feels something unusual. Not dramatic, just unusual. Will a vibration that's slightly off pattern from a normal engine harmonics. He's felt this vibration maybe 3 times in 15 years of flying. It's the kind of thing that makes a pilot's attention sharpen, because even very small anomalies in engine operation can indicate developing problems. He mentions it to First Officer David Kemp, who's flying the first leg of this route. David doesn't feel anything unusual through controls, but James is monitoring the instruments, and the displays are showing something marginally outside normal parameters. They exchange the careful glances of pilots who've trained for problems and who know that procedures exist precisely for moments like this when something feels slightly wrong. Could be a sensor issue. David suggests the kind of practical optimism that commercial pilots learn after dealing with hundreds of false alarms. Could be. James agrees, but his hands are already reaching for the engine monitoring display, pulling up more detailed information about engine performance. Running diagnostics anyway. At 37,000 feet, the vibration increases noticeably. Now David feels it too. A slight roughness in a normally smooth engine operation. The displays confirm it. The right engine is showing unusual parameters. Fuel consumption is increasing. Turbine temperature is rising incrementally. These are the signs of an engine developing a serious problem. They begin running the emergency procedures designed for exactly this situation. At 38,000 feet, the right engine begins failing. The vibration becomes pronounced. The display shows the engine losing power. Alarm sound in the cockpit. Not panic-inducing alarms, but clear professional alerts that something has failed and response is required. This is the moment that pilots train for. This is the moment where training becomes reality. James' hands move through muscle memory procedures with the precision of someone who has practiced these exact movements hundreds of times in simulators. His voice, when he speaks, is steady and professional. Proceeding with engine failure emergency procedures. David manages the radio and system tracking. ATC Flight 447. We're experiencing right engine failure at flight level 370. Initiating emergency procedures. The response from air traffic control is immediate and professional. Flight 447. Understood. Right engine failure. You're cleared for immediate descent to suitable altitude. Advise when you've stabilized. The aircraft is immediately stable on the left engine. Single engine operation is uncomfortable but manageable. The aircraft will fly on one engine. The question is whether they can restart the dead engine, and if not, whether they can make it to an airport capable of handling a single-engine emergency landing. They begin the restart procedures with methodical precision. The restart fails. The engine remains dead. They try again. Still nothing. The engine remains completely unresponsive. In the cabin, passengers notice the sudden silence more than any alarm. Commercial aircraft are never truly silent. There's always engine noise, a constant background frequency that becomes almost imperceptible after takeoff. The sudden reduction in that frequency registers in the subconscious as wrong. Sarah feels it immediately. Her training registers a change in engine sound before her conscious mind even articulates it. Most of the other passengers feel it, too. Some ask flight attendants what happened. Some simply feel unsettled without understanding why. Flight attendant Maria enters the cockpit briefly and exits with a carefully composed expression. Then she moves to the cabin with practiced calm, making an announcement about a minor technical issue that the pilots are handling. Her voice is steady and professional, but Sarah can see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands are gripping the back of the seats as she walks through the aisle. Flight attendants know the sounds of aircraft. They know what normal sounds like and what concerning sounds like. Maria has been flying for 12 years, and she knows that the change in engine sound is not minor. Sarah stopped thinking about cattle. Her training is asserting itself through 8 years of careful erasure. She can read the subtle signals. The change in engine sound, the pattern of crew behavior, the specific emergency protocol that only activates under certain circumstances. Her pulse remains steady because her body has been trained by decades of exposure to crisis to maintain physiological calm regardless of circumstances. The captain's voice comes through the cabin speaker system with perfect professional control. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our engines. The aircraft is completely safe and controllable. We'll be diverting to a nearby airport as a precaution. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelt fastened. Minor technical issue. The words are carefully chosen. They're not lies, but they're not the full truth either. The truth is that the aircraft is flying on a single engine at 35,000 feet with 234 passengers and crew aboard. The truth is that a single engine emergency landing in commercial aviation is serious and requires precise execution. The truth is that the pilots have access to approximately the same training and expertise regarding single engine management, and that they're currently working through every procedure they know. Sarah's hands grip the armrest of her seat, and she allows herself exactly 30 seconds of recognition that the situation is deteriorating. Then she compartmentalizes it. Training reasserts itself. She breathes slowly and waits to see what happens. The aircraft is still stable. The situation is serious but manageable. Experienced pilots can certainly manage single-engine operation. There's no need to panic. There's no need to do anything except wait and allow the professionals in the cockpit to do their jobs. Then, approximately 8 minutes into the single-engine crisis, as Captain Morrison is coordinating with air traffic control about landing options, the left engine fails. The cockpit illuminates with multiple warning lights simultaneously. Both engines are now completely unresponsive. The aircraft is a powerless glider descending from 35,000 feet with 234 people aboard and no engines to restart. The aircraft becomes immediately noticeably quieter. The change is so profound that some passengers stop breathing. The absence of engine noise is more terrifying than any alarm because the absence of engine noise means the engines aren't running. And if the engines aren't running, then the aircraft is falling. And if the aircraft is falling, then nothing else matters. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison's voice when he speaks to air traffic control is absolutely controlled and professional, but it carries the frequency of someone addressing the end of possibilities. Denver Center Flight 447. We have dual engine failure. Both engines are unresponsive to restart procedures. We are descending from flight level 370 and will be declaring a Mayday emergency. The response from air traffic control is immediate and carries a professional desperation of people trying to help a situation that has suddenly moved beyond standard procedures. Flight 447. Understood. Dual engine failure. Descending from flight level 370. You are cleared for immediate descent to any suitable landing facility. Diverting to nearest airport. Captain Morrison runs through the calculation in his mind with the precision of someone trained to think clearly under pressure. Descent rate, glide ratio, available options from 35,000 feet with dual engine failure and no power. The aircraft will descend approximately 2,000 feet per minute. That means they have roughly 17 minutes before they impact terrain. The nearest airport capable of handling a commercial aircraft is 45 minutes away. There are no suitable landing facilities within glide range of flight level 370 with dual engine failure. The captain and first officer both know this. All the calculations are running result in the same conclusion. They're descending from 35,000 feet with 234 people aboard, and they don't have enough altitude or forward momentum to reach any airport. The options that remain are all variations of failure. Water landing in the Pacific, not viable from this altitude and location. Emergency landing on some small rural airfield that will require an approach vector they can't execute. Partial glide to lower altitude in hopes of engine restart already attempted and failed. None of the options are good. All of them result in either a crash or a water landing in conditions where survival rates are statistically terrible. In the cabin, the chaos begins. Not panic yet, but the precursor to panic. Passengers are standing up. Some are crying. Some are praying. Some are holding their children. Flight attendants move through the aisles with grim purpose, assisting passengers into crash positions. Heads down, arms around their bodies. Prepare for impact. Maria's face carries a specific expression of someone who has rehearsed these procedures in training, but who has never actually had to execute them for real. Sarah stands up with quiet, purposeful movement. Not panic, not confusion. Just the movement of someone following instructions written into her nervous system years ago. Every muscle in her body understands that there's an emergency and that her training demands action. She moves toward the cockpit with the measured pace of someone who's been trained to move with purpose rather than panic. A flight attendant, not Maria, but James, a newer crew member, steps toward her instinctively. "Ma'am, we need you to remain seated for safety." The aircraft, as Sarah speaks with an authority that causes him to pause. "I need to speak with the captain now." It's not a question. It's not a request. It's a command delivered with a calm certainty that James' training has taught him to recognize as genuine authority. He's trained to respond to authority in emergency situations because clear chain of command saves lives. This woman has that authority in her voice. He steps aside. Sarah moves toward the cockpit door. She doesn't run. She doesn't show visible panic. She simply walks with the measured pace of someone who has moved through hundreds of emergency scenarios and has learned that controlled urgency is always more effective than frantic movement. The other passengers watch her pass. Some of them reach out toward her as if she might have answers. All of them are frightened enough to notice that this woman appears to understand something, possesses some clarity about procedures or possibilities. She reaches the cockpit and knocks. And the captain, hearing the knock, has approximately 5 seconds of hope that air traffic control is calling with additional information. Instead, a woman in work clothes and ranch-worn boots stands in the cockpit entrance with eyes that carry the clarity of someone who has seen this problem before, who is trained for this problem, who understands at a fundamental level the physics and procedures that might allow survival. "Captain, I'm Sarah Chun, former commander, U.S. Air Force. My training included dual-engine failure scenarios at extreme altitude. I know specialized procedures your commercial certifications don't cover. I can help if you'll allow me." Captain Morrison in that moment is desperate enough to hear her. He's already running every procedure from his commercial training, and none of them are working. He's currently calculating descent rates that will result in impact with terrain before reaching any viable landing facility. He's already mentally preparing his crew and passengers for the violent crash that conventional aviation wisdom says is unsurvivable from this altitude and damage configuration. He sees this woman's face and recognizes something immediately. The certainty of someone trained in command, the clarity of someone who has problem solved under pressure, the specific confidence of someone who has done the hard work of making decisions when all options are bad. He's trained to recognize expertise. And this woman carries the signature of expertise. "What do you need me to do?" he asks. What he should do is question her credentials, ask for verification, demand proper authorization. What he actually does is make a captain's judgment call based on 30 years of flying and the absolute recognition that her expertise might represent their only possibility for success. "I need to analyze the emergency systems," Sarah says, stepping fully into the cockpit and immediately beginning to examine the instrument panels with clinical precision. The cause becomes rapidly apparent. Fuel contamination. Ice crystals or debris has passed through both engines simultaneously and caused total flameout. The engines aren't physically damaged. They're simply unable to restart with contaminated fuel still present in the fuel lines. We need to clear the contamination before attempting restart. Sarah says, voice clinical and precise. The standard restart procedures in your manual are designed for clean fuel systems. If we use them now, the contaminated fuel will pass through the injectors again and damage the engines permanently. We need to manually flush the fuel lines first. That's not in the standard procedures. David, the first officer, says. His voice carries both fear and the training that tells him procedures exist for safety reasons, and violating them is generally a bad idea. Commercial procedures exist for commercial situations. Sarah responds calmly. This isn't commercial. This is a specialized problem, requiring a specialized solution. The engines will restart once the fuel system is cleared. But the restart procedures will damage the engines irreparably if we use them on contaminated fuel. We're running out of altitude. We need to act now. She's asking for his authority. She's asking him to make the command decision to deviate from established procedure based on her expertise and his judgment. It's exactly what a commander does. Provides the technical information and allows the final decision to rest with the person holding the authority. Captain Morrison makes a decision in approximately 2 seconds. The woman in front of him carries the weight of someone trained at command level. Her explanation makes sense. They're descending from 35,000 feet, and his standard procedures aren't working. He's out of conventional options. Do it, he says. Tell me what you need. Sarah moves to the overhead panel and begins activating fuel system bypass procedures that David didn't even know existed on this aircraft. Her hands move with practiced precision through a sequence that takes approximately 4 minutes to complete. Throughout, she maintains absolute calm and provides running commentary to keep the captain and first officer aware of what's happening and why. Isolating main fuel flow, she narrates, activating cross-feed valve sequence, opening secondary fuel lines to create bypass loop. We're going to direct fuel through the alternate pathways to avoid the contaminated sections of the primary lines. David watches her move through procedures and understands that this woman has done this exact procedure before, probably under conditions far more dangerous than this. Her movements have the smooth precision of someone who has trained extensively. She's not guessing. She's not improvising. She's executing a specific procedure that she knows works. The descent rate is still unacceptable. The aircraft continues falling toward terrain. They're down to 28,000 feet now. The time remaining is compressed, but Sarah completes the fuel line bypass sequence with steady precision. Her hands guide the pilots through each step. Engine 1, initiating start sequence. Sarah says. Her hands and voice guide David's hands through the procedure that violates the commercial manual, but aligns with military procedures designed for situations exactly like this. She monitors the instruments with the focus of someone whose attention can isolate every relevant variable from the chaos of data. The engine that died approximately 12 minutes ago begins to respond. Fuel flows through the bypass pathways. Ignition system cycle. The turbines begin, spinning slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. The engine comes alive with a sound that seems impossibly beautiful to Captain Morrison. The sound of power returning to a dead system. The right engine roars back to life. Engine 2 starting sequence. Sarah continues. Her focus is absolute. Her voice is the voice of someone who is trained for this exact moment, and whose training is now written into every movement, every command, every subtle correction. David's hands move through the restart sequence under her guidance. The second engine runs function. The aircraft stops falling toward terrain. The descent rate becomes manageable. The aircraft that was a powerless glider 3 minutes ago is now a functioning aircraft with fuel and power and possibility. The cockpit fills with the sound of 2 engines running normally. And Captain Morrison feels the deck shift beneath his feet as the aircraft transitions from emergency descent to control flight. Good work, Sarah says quietly to David. You follow procedures perfectly. The aircraft climbs to 15,000 feet and levels off. Captain Morrison immediately begins a new approach vectors toward the nearest suitable landing facility, a small military airfield in Kansas that has emergency services and a runway long enough to accommodate a commercial aircraft. They're not going to make Chicago. They're not going to make any major hub. They're going to land at this small military facility and hope the runway is adequate for an aircraft that's been flying in emergency mode for 20 minutes. As the aircraft levels off and the immediate crisis recedes from terminal disaster to serious emergency, Captain Morrison understands that he just participated in something that violated his training, that violated procedures, and that absolutely saved all 234 lives aboard this aircraft. He also understands that the woman who made this possible is not a farmer who happens to know about airplanes. Sarah moves to the radio and begins coordinating with military air traffic control using terminology and protocols that carry the signature of military training. Her communications are precise, efficient, and carry the authority of someone accustomed to directing complex operations. Military approach. Flight 447 with dual engine failure emergency. Currently stable at flight level 150. Requesting emergency descent to your facility. With emergency services standing by, the military approach controller's voice comes back immediately. And there's something in the response that signals recognition. Not recognition of the aircraft, but recognition of the communication protocol, the terminology, the specific precision of the emergency declaration. Flight 447 descending to 8,000 feet vectors for runway approach. Emergency services are standing by. The descent toward the military airfield is controlled but severe. The aircraft is damaged by whatever event caused a dual-engine failure. The fuel contamination has left residue in the lines, and the strain of dual-engine failure has created stress on multiple systems. The landing gear responds sluggishly when commanded down, and there's a moment where Sarah and Captain Morrison exchange a glance of understanding about how many things could still go wrong. But the approach is steady. The aircraft descends through 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 2,000 feet. The military airfield appears below them. A long runway with emergency vehicles already positioning along the approach path. Fire trucks, medical response vehicles, military personnel preparing for impact. Sarah remains in the cockpit with David managing the radio communications and Captain Morrison managing the final approach. Her hands stay positioned near the controls, but she doesn't interfere. Morrison is an experienced pilot, and this is his aircraft and his decision to make. But her presence, her knowledge, her certainty creates an anchor point that allows him to execute the approach with confidence. The aircraft touches down approximately 1,600 feet from the runway threshold. Not ideal, but manageable. The damaged landing gear holds. The aircraft slows. The aircraft stops. All 234 passengers and crew are alive. The aircraft comes to a complete stop, and the emergency services begin immediately. Fire trucks pulling alongside, medical response setting up, military personnel securing the scene. But before any of that, Captain Morrison turns to Sarah in the cockpit, and his face carries something that looks very much like the expression someone wears when they understand they just survived something statistically unsurvivable. "Thank you," he says. "We would have crashed without you. We would have all crashed." Sarah nods simply. She's already moving through the emotional aftermath that comes when someone who is trained for crisis finally stops moving. Her hands are shaking slightly now. Not during the emergency, but after it. This is a pattern of her training control during crisis. Processing during aftermath. The adrenaline that sustained her through the emergency is now processing through her system, and her body is beginning to acknowledge what happened. She moves back into the main cabin, and the passengers see her emerge from the cockpit, and they understand that this woman in work clothes just did something that saved their lives. She walks down the aisle toward the exit door, and passengers reach out toward her, and some are crying, and some are trying to thank her, and she nods at them with the gentle compassion of someone trained to lead people through their worst moments. She touches their shoulders. She makes brief eye contact. She acknowledges their gratitude without imposing her own relief upon them. The military personnel waiting outside the aircraft quickly understand the situation. The woman in work clothes is not a passenger who helped, but a former commander whose expertise and authority just saved an aircraft. They treat her with immediate military courtesy. They offer her a chair to sit in. They provide water. They move her away from the chaos of emergency response and into a secure facility for debrief. But before the military debrief, before the survivor's gratitude, before the news crews that are already beginning to descend on the story, Sarah sits alone for approximately 30 seconds in a military office and understands that her 8 years of careful anonymity are over. The media has already identified her. Someone on the ground who monitored the emergency communications has already recognized her name. Someone in military command has already acknowledged who she is to personnel on scene. The story is already beginning to spread. Former Air Force Commander Sarah Chin retired from active service 8 years ago, saved Flight 447 to expert emergency management. The narrative is already being constructed. Her name is already public. Her past is already being examined and documented. In the aftermath, Captain Morrison and First Officer Kemp and every survivor on that aircraft will tell the same story. There was a farmer, just a regular person traveling to a veterinary symposium. And when the crisis came, she revealed herself to be someone of extraordinary expertise and command authority. The story will be told and retold as a moment when hidden strength was revealed by necessity. News organizations will begin researching her military service. Social media will begin reconstructing her life. The privacy she carefully constructed will evaporate in the light of 234 grateful survivors and a miracle landing. The military personnel who debriefed her will file official reports acknowledging that Commander Chin responded to an emergency situation with expertise that shaped military aviation procedures. Her recommendations for the aircraft's emergency response will be compared against standard procedures and found to exceed them in every meaningful way. The military aviation community will recognize her name and understand that she was more than just a decorated officer. She was someone whose expertise shaped how an entire generation of pilots thinks about emergency management. And Sarah Chun, former commander, will sit through all of this knowing that her choice to step away from command, to become invisible, to live as simply a farmer was genuine and real and completely overthrown by the moment when 234 people needed someone with her specific expertise and training. The question moving forward is whether someone who has been fully trained for command can ever truly step away from it, whether expertise that has been achieved can ever be truly retired, whether the burden of knowing you can save people ever fully releases you from the weight of that knowledge. Sarah doesn't have answers to these questions yet, but she knows the cattle still need feeding. She knows the ranch still requires maintenance. She knows the life she built is still waiting for her, even if the world now knows who she actually is. She thinks about the survivors, about the pilots whose expertise combined with hers to save the aircraft, about the shared moment of understanding when she explained the procedures and Captain Morrison made the decision to trust her, about the weight of command authority and what it means to carry it. She thinks about going home to the cattle and the fences and the honest work of managing land and animals and the simple life she deliberately chose, knowing now that sometimes the life you build for yourself cannot contain who you actually are when crisis demands it. The military office where she sits is austere and functional, the kind of space designed for efficiency rather than comfort. A colonel enters with a folder and sits across from her with the careful respect of someone acknowledging a superior officer. Even though Sarah hasn't worn a uniform in 8 years, the colonel's name is Harrison, and he's responsible for coordinating the emergency response and documenting what happened during Flight 447's crisis. Commander Chun, I want to be direct, Colonel Harrison says, his voice carrying genuine respect. What you did today exceeds every standard we have for emergency response. The procedures you executed, they're not in any commercial pilot manual. They're not even in most military protocols we currently teach. You innovated under pressure in a way that saved 234 lives. Sarah listens without responding immediately. She's heard variations of this conversation before during her military career. The acknowledgement of expertise, the gratitude, the implicit suggestion that perhaps she should consider returning to active service. She knows what comes next. We'd like to debrief you thoroughly. Harrison continues. Document your procedures. Understand how you develop those specific techniques. There's value in what you demonstrated today. Value that can inform how we train pilots and manage emergency situations across the entire military aviation network. I'm retired, Colonel Sarah says quietly. I came back for the emergency. That doesn't change my status or my plans. Understood. Harrison nods. But you're aware that 234 people survived today because of your expertise. You're aware that military pilots around the world could benefit from the procedures you employed. You're aware that what you demonstrated represents a level of mastery that most pilots never achieve. Sarah knows all of this. She's known it for 8 years. The knowledge has sat in the back of her mind every day she's worked on the ranch. The knowledge that she possesses expertise that can help others. The knowledge that stepping away from command doesn't erase the fact that she's trained to command. The knowledge that her skills will atrophy over time if she doesn't use them. And the knowledge that she's chosen to let them atrophy because the burden of using them was too heavy to bear. What I know, Colonel, is that I made a decision 8 years ago. She says, I decided that the cost of carrying command authority, the weight of decisions that affect other people's lives, was more than I was willing to pay. That decision hasn't changed. What happened today was an emergency. It required response, but it doesn't change my fundamental choice about how I want to live. Harrison nods slowly. He's worked with enough senior officers to understand when someone has made a decision and won't be swayed by argument or appeal. But he makes one final attempt. The F-22 pilots who provided escort during your descent, they've asked to speak with you. They recognize your expertise over the radio. They want to acknowledge what they witnessed. And frankly, Commander, military aviators at that level don't ask to acknowledge someone unless they recognize genuine mastery. This lands differently. Sarah's expression softened slightly. The F-22 pilots represent something that matters. The professional military aviation community recognizing expertise and competence. It's one thing to save lives. It's another thing entirely to have elite military aviators acknowledge that the procedures and decision-making come from someone whose authority and expertise they respect at the deepest level. I'll speak with them, Sarah says, but I need to be clear. This doesn't represent a change in my status. This is a moment. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Colorado. I'm going back to my ranch. I'm going back to cattle and the fences and the life I chose. Colonel Harrison stands and extends his hand. When Sarah shakes it, his grip carries respect and understanding and the specific recognition that he's sitting across from someone who's earned the absolute right to make their own decisions about their future, regardless of what the military or the world might want from her. The F-22 pilots are waiting in a conference room. Captain James Reeves, who led the escort, and Captain Maria Sanchez, who flew wing position. Both of them stand when Sarah enters and both of them salute, which is correct military protocol, but also carries the weight of genuine respect. Commander Chin Reeves says we wanted to thank you for the coordination, flying escort for your descent, listening to your tactical guidance over the radio. It was an honor to work under your command, even briefly. Sarah shakes both their hands. You both executed perfectly. Your escort positioning maintained emergency approach vector. You provided exactly the tactical support that was needed. You did good work. We studied your procedures. Sanchez says the doctrine that shaped modern emergency protocols. We learned from what you developed. When we heard your voice over the radio and realized who we were coordinating with, it meant something to us. It meant we were coordinating with someone whose expertise literally shaped how we think about emergency situations. This is what matters. Not the gratitude of passengers or the recognition of the media or the appreciation of the military hierarchy. This is what matters. Elite pilots acknowledging that someone's expertise has shaped how they approach their work. This is the weight of command authority. This is what Sarah has been trying to escape for 8 years. She sits with the pilots for approximately 30 minutes. They discuss the emergency response. They acknowledge the procedures. They express genuine professional respect. And when Sarah finally stands to leave, she understands that there will be a bridge between her farmer's life and her military past that she cannot completely burn. 2 days later, Sarah stands in her kitchen in Colorado, watching the sun rise over prairie. The cattle are already grazing in the south pasture. The horses are moving toward the feed troughs. Everything is exactly as she left it, exactly as it would be if nothing had changed. But everything has changed. The news cycle has already moved past Flight 447. Other stories have emerged. Other emergencies have captured the media's attention. But in military aviation circles, Sarah Chen's name is circulating with a different kind of recognition. Military minds are requesting permission to show footage of her emergency procedures in pilot training. Aviation textbooks are being revised to include the fuel system bypass techniques she employed. Her name is being attached to procedures that will be studied and taught and practiced by pilots for decades. The cottage industry of speculation has already begun. News outlets are piecing together her military history from declassified records and interviews with retired officers. They're reconstructing her service record, documenting her achievements, attempting to understand how someone so accomplished simply disappeared into rural Colorado to raise cattle. The farmers in her small town, who accepted her anonymity without question, are now being interviewed about what they knew or didn't know about their neighbor. Sarah reads none of this. She intentionally avoids the internet and the news coverage. She knows what's being said about her. She knows her privacy is permanently altered. But she also knows that the cattle still need feeding, the fences still need maintenance, and the work of managing the land continues regardless of what the outside world has discovered about her past. The Veterinary Symposium in Chicago has sent her an invitation to speak as a keynote presenter. Military organizations have requested consulting positions. A producer has reached out about developing her story into a documentary. The world wants to know who she is, wants to understand her expertise, wants to turn her into a story that fits into categories and narratives. But Sarah has already decided she will not return to active military service. She will not become a consultant or a talking head or celebrity story. She will remain on her ranch. She will feed her cattle. She will fix her fences. She will maintain the life she chose because the choice was real and the life is real. Even if the world now knows about the commander she used to be, what will change is subtle. She'll begin taking advanced refresher courses in emergency procedures, not to return service, but to ensure that if another crisis occurs, her knowledge remains current and reliable. She'll establish a consulting relationship with military aviation training programs, providing guidance and expertise without requiring active service. She'll become a bridge between the farmer she is and the commander she was, not fully inhabiting either role, but allowing both to exist in balance. The burden of expertise she understands now cannot be completely set aside. The knowledge of how to save lives, the training that shaped her for command, the weight of knowing what she knows. These things are part of who she is. They don't disappear because she's chosen a rural life. They don't become irrelevant because she's retired. They simply exist within her, dormant until crisis demand them, but never truly absent. And so Sarah Chen, farmer and former commander, returns to her life on the Colorado ranch. She feeds the cattle. She fixes the fences. She maintains her property and her animals and her carefully constructed world. But she does so now with the understanding that sometimes the life you build for yourself cannot contain who you actually are. Sometimes expertise and responsibility and the way to command authority will reassert itself. And when it does, you answer the call. Not because you want to, but because some burdens once carried cannot be fully set down. They can only be managed, integrated, balanced against the other choices and needs and responsibilities that define a life.